Governments across the developed world are spending more money than at any point in peacetime history. Trillions of dollars flow through national budgets every year. Taxes are higher, public debt is larger. And yet, for millions of people, life feels harder, not easier. Housing is unaffordable, hospitals are overcrowded, schools are understaffed, wages struggle to keep up with prices. So where did all that money go? How did systems designed to protect people from economic insecurity end up creating a new kind of anxiety? And what happens when the welfare state reaches the limits of what it can promise and what it can actually deliver? To understand why this question matters now, we have to step back in time, to an era when the welfare state was not a problem to be managed, but a solution to everything. In the decades after World War II, much of the developed world was rebuilding from ruins. Cities lay in rubble. Entire generations had been lost, and governments faced a simple but urgent task: rebuild economies, restore social stability, and make sure the catastrophe never happened again. Out of that moment emerged the modern welfare state: universal health care, public pensions, subsidized housing, free or low-cost education, unemployment insurance. These systems were not designed out of generosity alone. They were designed for stability. Leaders believed that economic security would prevent political extremism, social unrest, and the kind of despair that had fueled conflict in the first place. And for a long time, it worked. Between the 1950s and the 1980s, productivity surged. Populations were young. The ratio of workers to retirees was high. Governments collected taxes from a growing labor force and redistributed them through public services that most people relied on and trusted. Economic growth made promises affordable. The welfare state expanded, but so did the economic pie beneath it. That era quietly ended. Today, the welfare state still exists. In fact, on paper, it is larger than ever. In many advanced economies, government spending now accounts for 40 to 55% of GDP. Public budgets dwarf anything seen in the mid-20th century. And yet, the experience of everyday life tells a very different story. To understand why, we need to look not at ideology, but at arithmetic. The first pressure point is demographic, and it is relentless. Populations across the developed world are aging at a speed no welfare system was designed to handle. In the 1970s, most rich countries had 5 or 6 working-age adults for every retiree. Today, that ratio is collapsing. In countries like Japan, Italy, and Germany, there are barely 2 workers per retiree. In some regions, it is heading toward 1-to-1. This changes everything. Pensions were built on the assumption that many workers would support relatively few retirees. Healthcare systems assumed that most spending would occur late in life, but for a smaller share of the population. As societies age, those assumptions break down. Spending rises automatically, year after year, even if benefits are never expanded. Governments do not vote on this increase. It simply happens. Every year, more people retire. Every year, healthcare costs climb as chronic illness replaces acute disease. Every year, fewer workers are left to fund systems designed for a very different demographic reality. The welfare state becomes heavier, not because politicians choose to expand it, but because time does. The second pressure point is debt and the cost of carrying it. For decades, governments could borrow cheaply. After the global financial crisis, and again during the pandemic, interest rates fell to historic lows. Debt accumulated rapidly, but it felt manageable. When borrowing costs are near zero, even large deficits seem harmless. Many governments came to see debt not as a constraint, but as a tool. That illusion is now gone. As inflation surged and central banks raised rates, the cost of servicing debt exploded. In several major economies, interest payments are now one of the fastest growing items in the budget. In some cases, they rival or exceed defense spending. This is money that buys no schools, no hospitals, no housing. It simply pays for the past. Debt service is the ultimate crowd out. It quietly consumes fiscal space, leaving less room for everything else. And unlike most welfare spending, it cannot be cut without risking financial crisis. The more governments borrowed during years of easy money, the more trapped they became when rates normalized. The welfare state did not just get larger, it became more fragile. The third pressure point is political, and it may be the most corrosive of all. Modern welfare systems are incredibly complex. They involve layers of administration, regulation, and eligibility rules built up over decades. Each reform adds new programs, new agencies, new exceptions. Over time, the system becomes harder to manage, harder to explain, and harder to change. Politicians operate on short electoral cycles. Welfare systems operate on multi-decade timelines. The incentives do not align. Cutting benefits is politically toxic. Raising taxes is unpopular. Structural reform produces pain now and rewards later, often after the next election. So governments do what politics encourages them to do: delay, patch, and borrow. Instead of reforming pension systems, they add debt. Instead of restructuring healthcare, they inject emergency funding. Instead of simplifying welfare, they layer new programs on top of old ones. The system grows, but coherence shrinks. From the outside, it looks like generosity. From the inside, it is inertia. The result is a welfare state that spends more money than ever, but delivers less of what people actually need. Nowhere is this more visible than in housing. In many advanced economies, housing has become the largest expense for households and the greatest source of insecurity. Yet public spending on housing support has risen dramatically. Subsidies, tax breaks, social housing budgets, and rent assistance programs consume billions every year. And still, prices keep rising. The reason is structural. Welfare systems treat housing as a social issue, while markets treat it as a financial asset. When governments subsidize demand without fixing supply, zoning laws, land use restrictions, slow permitting, they push prices higher. The money flows, but the homes do not. For young families, this feels like betrayal. They pay high taxes into systems their parents benefited from, yet face a housing market that excludes them entirely. The welfare state protects the past more effectively than it secures the future. Healthcare tells a similar story. Public spending on healthcare has risen faster than almost any other category. In many countries, it absorbs 10 to 12% of GDP. And yet, patients face longer wait times, understaffed hospitals, and overwhelmed emergency rooms. Again, demographics and structure collide. Aging populations increase demand, medical technology raises costs, bureaucratic systems struggle to adapt. More money keeps the system running, but not improving. The welfare state becomes a maintenance machine, designed to prevent collapse, not to deliver excellence. These pressures play out differently across countries, but the pattern is remarkably consistent. In the United States, welfare spending is fragmented. Healthcare is expensive and inefficient. Social programs are means-tested and administratively complex. The government spends enormous sums, yet many people fall through the cracks. The result is resentment from taxpayers who feel overburdened and from beneficiaries who feel abandoned. In Western Europe, welfare systems are broader and more universal. Benefits are generous, but fiscal space is tighter. Countries like France and Italy struggle to reconcile expansive social promises with stagnant growth and rising debt. Reform triggers protests. Delay deepens the problem. Japan offers a glimpse of the future. Its welfare state remains intact, but only because debt has filled the gap left by demographics. The system appears stable on the surface, but the burden is silently transferred to future generations. Despite these differences, the social consequences converge. Middle-class households feel squeezed. They earn too much to qualify for assistance, but too little to feel secure. They pay into systems they increasingly doubt they will benefit from. Trust erodes. At the same time, political polarization intensifies. As welfare systems strain, groups compete over shrinking fiscal resources. Immigration becomes a flashpoint. Generational conflict sharpens. The welfare state, once a source of unity, becomes a battleground. This is how economic anxiety turns into political anger. And yet, the most dangerous illusion persists. The belief that the welfare state can simply be expanded indefinitely to solve these problems. It cannot. There is no version of the modern welfare state that escapes arithmetic. Aging populations, higher interest rates, slower productivity growth, and political constraints impose hard limits. Ignoring them does not preserve the system. It hollows it out. So what are the alternatives? Some argue for higher taxes, especially on wealth and high incomes. This can buy time, but rarely solves structural imbalance on its own. Others push for cuts, but blunt austerity often harms the most vulnerable and fuels backlash. The most difficult path is reform. Reform means confronting uncomfortable truths. Retirement ages may need to rise. Benefits may need to be targeted more precisely. Healthcare systems may need to prioritize outcomes over process. Housing policy must shift from subsidies to supply. These changes are politically painful because they challenge expectations built over generations. But avoiding them carries its own cost. A welfare state that consumes more resources while delivering less security. The future likely holds three possible paths. In the first, governments continue to delay reform. Spending rises, debt grows, services degrade, trust collapses. Eventually, crisis forces abrupt and chaotic change. In the second, states retrench aggressively, benefits are cut. Inequality rises, social cohesion frays, economic insecurity deepens for those least able to bear it. In the third, societies renegotiate the welfare state itself, not as a promise of protection from all risk, but as a framework for shared resilience. Smaller in some areas, stronger in others, more honest about trade-offs. None of these paths are easy, but pretending there is a painless option is the most dangerous choice of all. The welfare state was one of the great achievements of the modern world. It reduced poverty, stabilized societies, and gave millions a sense of dignity and security. Its crisis is not a moral failure, it is a structural one. And structural problems require structural thinking. The question facing advanced economies today is not whether they believe in social protection. It is whether they are willing to redesign it for a world that no longer resembles the one it was built for. Because systems that refuse to change do not stay the same. They decay. And when they do, the cost is not measured only in budgets and balance sheets, but in trust, opportunity, and the quiet fear that tomorrow will be harder than today. That fear is already here. What comes next depends on whether societies choose to confront it or continue to pay, without ever asking where the money went. For decades, the welfare state was built on a simple promise. If you worked hard, paid your taxes, and followed the rules, society would protect you from the worst shocks of life. Illness would not bankrupt you. Old age would not mean poverty. A job loss would not destroy your future. That promise shaped entire generations and defined what it meant to live in a developed country. But slowly, almost invisibly, that promise began to change. Today, governments are still collecting record levels of tax revenue. Public spending as a share of GDP is near historical highs across most advanced economies. And yet, the lived experience of millions tells a different story. The welfare state is still expensive, but it no longer feels protective. This is not because governments suddenly became less generous. It is because the structure underneath the system has shifted. In the past, welfare systems redistributed income in a growing economy. Productivity gains created new wealth, and the state decided how to share part of that growth. But over the last 2 decades, productivity growth has slowed, while obligations have exploded. Aging populations, rising healthcare costs, and ballooning debt have turned the welfare state from a redistributor of growth into a manager of decline. More and more public money is now spent simply keeping the system alive. Interest payments consume budgets without improving lives. Pension spending rises automatically, regardless of economic performance. Healthcare costs increase even when outcomes stagnate. Each year, governments commit more resources just to stand still. For the average citizen, this creates a deeply unsettling disconnect. Taxes rise, but services feel worse. Waiting lists grow longer. Housing becomes unreachable. The safety net is still there, but full of holes. And this is where trust begins to break. When people no longer see a clear link between what they contribute and what they receive, the welfare state stops feeling like solidarity and starts feeling like extraction. Younger generations, in particular, look at the numbers and realize they are funding benefits they may never enjoy themselves. This quiet realization reshapes politics, culture, and social cohesion. It turns economic stress into moral resentment, and it forces a question that no modern society can avoid forever. What is the welfare state actually for in a world where growth is slower, populations are older, and money is no longer cheap? That question sits at the center of the crisis, and answering it may determine whether the welfare state adapts or slowly collapses under its own weight.